Welcome back, America. Today is tax day. Wonderful. A day that feels like Christmas for the IRS and a day of mourning for pretty much everyone else, including myself. Now, this year, the IRS debuted its direct file program for Americans in a handful of states. Now, the goal of this pilot program is to give taxpayers a free alternative to paying for a third-party software like TurboTax or H&R Block, or actually going into one of those offices. And of course, many questions still remain about the program, like whether or not the IRS can deliver a comparable experience to these vendors, as well as whether or not the federal agency should even be trusted with it in the first place. So joining me now to talk more about this is Patrick Hedger. He is the executive director for the Taxpayers Protection Alliance, and he joins me now. Patrick, welcome to the show. Happy Tax Day.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. I think most folks aren't so happy, myself included. I just filed, so not feeling super great, but happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm smiling through the pain. Actually, I just filed an extension, so I'm just procrastinating, and I don't know how many extensions I can file, but I'm going to max it out. Speaking of, I want to ask you about this new pilot program. I have seen a lot of folks out there saying that this direct file program is not trustworthy. It's kind of clumsy. What are your thoughts on it? Should people try it if it's available to them?
Yeah, so there are two really big issues with direct file as an idea. The first is really looking at the IRS's performance as an agency on its core functions. The IRS hasn't proven that it can walk, and now it's trying to chew gum and become a software company, and that's not something it really should be doing. The second is, do you really want to have the fox in the henhouse, so to speak? There's something really important to having that adversarial market-driven relationship with having a private tax preparer do your taxes for you and then going up against the IRS, because ultimately the IRS's mission is to maximize revenue. And so it remains to be seen if folks that go through direct file are actually getting every dollar back and getting prompted for every exemption and deduction that they could be eligible for compared to a private tax prep software or private tax preparers. So those are the two big problems that I see with IRS direct file.
Well, and Patrick, honestly, on the tech side of things, I mean, I know that any type of online software is going to be vulnerable to hacking and information getting leaked and all of that. So even if you're going into an H&R Block or something like that, they're going to be filing online. We're not saying that you can do this absent of the internet. But I have learned in the past, history has taught me, and history dictates that when the government tries to create an online portal for anything, aka Obamacare, it doesn't really work out. So that's my biggest concern, is that let's say I jump through all the hoops and I do this easy process. Who can promise me that it's not going to crash like Obamacare did? Who can tell me that it's not going to be vulnerable to some type of hacking like a lot of other government software programs have? I don't have any of those assurances, do I?
No, you don't. And the Affordable Care Act exchanges are a really great example. First, on the cost side, the Government Accountability Office just came out with a report this week that found that the IRS basically grossly underestimated the cost of this direct file program, and they found no basis for the IRS's cost estimates at all. And found that the IRS hadn't even included the startup costs for this software. So really problematic there. On the Affordable Care Act side, I was forced to buy health insurance by the Affordable Care Act through the DC Health Exchange, DC Health Link. And because of that, myself and many folks that live and work in the District of Columbia, we all have to have our credit frozen and dark web monitoring, because the DC Health Link leaked my most sensitive information, Social Security number, you name it, of myself and members of Congress. So that's a pretty close parallel to the sort of security flaws that we could find with the direct file program. And just the IRS in general, in August, the Government Accountability Office again put out a report about what the IRS needs to do to better safeguard user data. And they made 15 specific recommendations to the IRS, and not one of them has been addressed yet, according to the Government Accountability Office. So again, it gets back to that walk and chew gum issue. Why is the IRS not devoting resources to the basic things we expect it to do, like securing our data, and now trying to compete with private sector firms that have already been doing this for years and know what they're doing?
Yeah, I don't know many other three-letter agencies in Washington that I trust less than the IRS. And there are a whole lot of them. They're all at the bottom of the barrel. I wanted to ask you, though, about Mark Cuban and some comments that he made online. And I think that he was trying to dunk on President Trump. I wasn't familiar with simping for the IRS as a form of dunking on Donald Trump, but he tweeted, "I pay what I owe. Tomorrow, I will wire transfer to the IRS $288 million. This country has done so much for me. I'm proud to pay my taxes every single year. Tag a former president that you know doesn't." Wow, that is a whole lot of allegiance to the IRS, Patrick.
Yeah, it's sort of a weird comment because everybody, whether you're a multi-billionaire or you're just trying to squeak by, is going to use the tax laws to their advantage to keep as much money as they can. That's just the rational incentive that we all have as human beings. That's great. It's great that he's able to contribute so much. It's because he's had so much success. That's fantastic. But if he feels like he needs to contribute more, the IRS and the Treasury have an option for that. It's something interesting that I see when you see a lot of progressive billionaires saying, tax me more, tax me more. You can cut a check as a gift to pay down the debt anytime you want. And they never seem to do it.
You absolutely can. Yep. Go ahead. Okay. Speaking of millionaires and billionaires, a report recently came out that the IRS, who promised to go after millionaires and billionaires with new agents and new funding, lo and behold, 63% of new audits as of last summer target people who make less than $200,000. Now, that might have sounded like a lot of money 5 years ago, but in Joe Biden's economy, that really doesn't put you in a position where you're actually doing very well in Bidenomics. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's entirely predictable. During this debate, when we talked about new IRS enforcement, there's a really, interestingly enough, the data has been put together by ProPublica, who generally hosts a lot of this data that gets leaked by the IRS, but they also have data related to where audits are happening in the IRS. And they made this map that shows the counties in the United States where audit rates are the highest. And if you lined that map up next to a Treasury map of where the most low-income folks and the most minority populations are, those look like the same map, which tells you that the IRS is actually going after disproportionately low-income and minority taxpayers. And that's because those are the folks that don't have the resources to fight back. They don't have the accountants and the lawyers to be able to contradict what the IRS is saying. They usually just have to take it. And now the IRS is, instead of just going after that low-hanging fruit that they traditionally have gone after, they've just moved kind of one step up and are starting to go after middle-income taxpayers, maybe even upper-middle-class taxpayers. But again, this is not the guy sitting on his yacht in the Cayman Islands. This is really the average small business owner, sole proprietor that has a lot of business revenue that looks like personal revenue that may count as putting them into that tax bracket, but are cash-poor individuals. So it's really concerning, but entirely predictable. The IRS is responding to the incentives in front of it, and you'd much rather go after somebody who doesn't have the same resources to fight back than, say, a Mark Cuban.
Okay, I hate to even ask this question because I don't want to think of the prospect of the reality of it. But if Joe Biden wins again in November and there is a second Biden term, what do taxpayers expect?
Yeah, so there are a lot of provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Trump tax cuts from 2017, that will expire. And the rate cuts across the board, all income levels saw an effective rate cut, will revert back to prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So you'll see higher taxes immediately. And we'll also see one of the big things that's, I think, most problematic for the most amount of people is the reversion of the standard deduction back to what it was prior to the Trump tax cuts. The standard deduction was effectively doubled by the Trump tax cuts. And that, one, provides a huge tax cut for folks that have simple taxes. You're able to deduct a lot more than you previously were, but it also makes tax compliance a lot easier. So if you had itemized deductions that were kind of right up against what the standard deduction is, sometimes it's easier to just take the standard deduction, file your taxes in a few minutes. And so tax compliance will become much more difficult and much more expensive.
Ugh, I nearly threw up when I asked that question. That's why it took me so long to get it out. Patrick, nobody likes paying taxes. Nobody likes even talking about it, but we have to do it, especially today on tax day. And you are the best person to have on to do that with us. So thank you so much. All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be back on the other side of these messages.